On the 14th of March 1970, a cargo ship named the SS Columbia Eagle was steaming through the Gulf of Thailand. It was carrying enough napalm to incinerate a city. Suddenly, two men walked onto the bridge with handguns. They told the captain a live bomb was hidden somewhere on the ship and would detonate if he did not comply. The captain had minutes to decide. He ordered the crew to abandon ship, leaving only a skeleton crew of 15 men behind to face the hijackers. This was the first armed mutiny on a United States flagship in over 120 years. It was led by a 25-year-old sailor named Clyde William McKay Jr. McKay was from the American South, but he was far from home. He was a merchant sailor who had grown to hate the war he was supplying. He was joined by Alvin Leonard Glatkowski, a 20-year-old sailor with a similar grudge. McKay wanted to make a statement that the world could not ignore. At the time of the mutiny, the Columbia Eagle was a victory ship, a relic from the Second World War. It was built for speed and cargo, not for security. According to the official manifest, the ship was carrying 4,525 tons of explosives. This included over 1,200 napalm bombs. The ship was originally destined for Sattahip, Thailand. From there, the cargo would be trucked to United States Air Force bases for use in Vietnam. McKay and Glatkowski had different plans. Why would two merchant sailors risk a life sentence to stop a single ship? The answer lay in the politics of the era. By 1970, the anti-war movement had reached the merchant marine, where men saw the cargo they carried every day. McKay had smuggled 2 handguns on board in his personal luggage. He had been waiting for the right moment to strike since the ship left California. The ship's master, Captain Donald Swan, was a veteran sailor who did not know the bomb was a total bluff. The log records that at 11:30 in the morning, the mutineers took control. They forced Swan to sound the alarm that signaled a disaster. 24 crew members scrambled into the lifeboats. They believed the ship was about to explode at any second. McKay and Glatkowski watched them go. They were now in command of a ship filled with enough explosives to level a harbor, and they were heading for Cambodia. By the evening of March 14th, the 24 men in the lifeboats were alone in the Gulf. They were rescued hours later by another munition ship, the SS Rappahannock. On the Columbia Eagle, the atmosphere was quiet. McKay and Glatkowski ordered the remaining skeleton crew to steer the ship towards Sihanoukville. The next morning, the United States Coast Guard cutter Mellon was in hot pursuit. It was the fastest ship in the area, and it was closing the gap. The Mellon chased the Columbia Eagle for hours. But as the cargo ship neared the Coast Guard commander received a frustrating order. The Mellon was ordered to stop at the 12-mile limit. To go any further would be to violate Cambodian territorial waters and risk an international incident. On March 15th, the Columbia Eagle crossed that line. McKay and Glatkowski had successfully delivered their prize to a neutral power. They dropped anchor off the coast of Sihanoukville. McKay signaled the Cambodian authorities, requesting political asylum from the head of state, Prince Norodom Sihanouk. At this moment, the mutineers believed they were heroes. They expected to be welcomed as peace activists who had struck a blow against the American war machine. But on March 18th, the world changed while they were still on board. A pro-United States coup led by General Lon Nol overthrew Prince Sihanouk. Suddenly, the mutineers were no longer guests of a neutral prince. They were prisoners of a new regime that was desperate for American support and weapons. The Cambodian guards moved them to a prison ship on the Mekong River. The situation was surreal. McKay and Glatkowski were now pawns in a civil war. While held on the river, the mutineers reportedly smoked marijuana with their guards. They even gave interviews to Western journalists who tracked them down. Prince Sihanouk, now in exile, claimed the entire mutiny was a CIA plot. He believed the Americans had staged the event to deliver bombs to the new coup leaders. This theory was widely believed by the global left at the time. However, the ship was carrying napalm bombs, which required specialized aircraft to drop. The new Cambodian government needed small arms and ammunition, not 500-pound napalm canisters. The CIA plot theory eventually fell apart. How does a hero become a prisoner in the space of 48 hours? McKay and Glatkowski were about to find out how little their protest mattered to the new regime. On April 8, 1970, the Cambodian government made a decision. They released the Columbia Eagle and its entire cargo back to United States control. The ship finally arrived in Thailand and delivered its napalm. The mutiny had delayed the shipment by only 3 weeks. McKay and Glatkowski remained in Cambodian custody. As the months passed, the conditions grew worse and the political pressure from Washington increased. On November 4, 1970, McKay escaped from Cambodian custody with U.S. Army deserter Larry Humphrey. They disappeared into the Cambodian jungle, heading north. They were seeking the Khmer Rouge, believing the communist rebels would grant them the asylum the city had denied. 1 month later, on December 15th, Glatkowski surrendered at the U.S. Embassy in Phnom Penh. Glatkowski was extradited to the United States. In 1971, he was tried and sentenced to 10 years in prison for mutiny and assault. He eventually served 7 years. But while Glatkowski was in a jail cell, his partner McKay had become a ghost in the jungle. For decades, no one knew what happened to Clyde McKay. Some believed he was living in secret in the Soviet Union or China. Others heard rumors that he had been captured by the Khmer Rouge. According to these reports, the rebels did not see him as an ally, but as a spy. The report does not say exactly when it happened, but the available facts allow a grim guess. McKay and Humphrey were likely executed shortly after joining the rebels. The mystery lasted for 30 years. It was not until 1990 that remains were recovered from a remote site in Cambodia and sent for testing. In 2003, DNA testing confirmed the truth. The remains belonged to Clyde William McKay Jr. Looking back, the mutiny was a masterpiece of deception. McKay and Glatkowski had seized a ship with nothing but 2 handguns and a lie about a bomb. They had successfully diverted thousands of tons of napalm. They had forced the United States Navy and Coast Guard to watch from the sidelines. But they had timed their move perfectly for their own destruction. If they had arrived 3 days earlier, the prince might have protected them. By arriving during a coup, they handed themselves over to a government that viewed them as a liability. Their protest was buried by the very war they tried to stop. The SS Columbia Eagle returned to service and was eventually sold for scrap. The napalm it carried was dropped on targets in Southeast Asia as planned. The mutiny remains a strange footnote in the history of the Vietnam War. It was the moment the conflict on the ground reached the men on the water. Clyde McKay and Alvin Glatkowski were responsible for the seizure. The decision to mutiny was theirs alone, driven by a desperate desire to end the violence. Nothing concretely changed in the way the merchant marine operated after the event. Security remained light, and munitions continued to flow to the front lines. The story of the Columbia Eagle is a reminder that even the most daring act of defiance can be swallowed by the chaos of history. Please subscribe for more interesting stories.